Okay, well, I go way back. I'm in my early 80s now, and I started the UFO thing when in the late 50s when we were going to school in Kansas City. I was a student, and we started a UFO club there, and then I branched out into NICAP, which was National Investigations Committee on Area Phenomena, and I worked with Major Donald Keyhole there on a couple of investigations. And so I kind of hung it up for about 25 or 30 years, because I was in public school teaching in small towns, and there weren't a lot of people interested in small town UFOs. They were interested in crops and everything else, but not small towns, not UFOs. So I started about 20 years ago at this site, and said, well, I'll go down and take a look. And I went back a dozen times, and I've been going there since 1994. We found so much stuff that I couldn't leave it. So we wrote a book on it.
I see. And if you wouldn't mind, maybe please share some of the details about this UFO crash on the plains of San Augustine back in 1947, because I think a lot of people know about Roswell. You don't hear too many people talk too much about the other crash. Well,
this happened 5 days before the Roswell crash was discovered. Now, it's possible they went down the same night, but ours was near a highway and theirs wasn't. Mm-hmm. So that may be the difference. But as far as we know, unless two ships collided in the air, our side has nothing to do with Roswell. But we have found Roswell doesn't have one scrap of evidence that lots of people have talked about it, but we found it out there, but had to take a bushel basket to get most of it out each time. So we had 15, 20 pounds of wreckage we pulled out of the site. I'm up on if your listeners are on their computers, can I give a website out?
Oh, yes, please do.
Okay, website is www.ufocrashbook.com. Take a look at 3 W's at ufocrashbook.com, and they should be up on it.
And as a matter of fact, Art, I have you linked up on our website, and it goes right over. We got a tonight's pick page, so your link is there, and we also have it on the home page in the picture slider.
Oh, great! All right, now I'm not at my computer. I can get to it. It's about 10 feet away, but I'm looking at my home page right now. I put it out and paste it up, but on the home page that we have, it shows. Gentleman working with a metal detector, and we found quite a bit of stuff underground, and some of it was even on the surface.
Amazing. And I was looking at the pictures, and of course we talked about some of this the last time, and I think that it's incredible stuff. Now, who exactly discovered, because I don't remember everything about it, but who discovered the crashed object?
The crashed object was found, we're pretty sure, by a soil conservation agent named Barney Barnett. It was actually, he was working with his first year with the Soil Conservation Service, and was on his way south down the highway and saw something glinting. And he knew the ranchers and what they were building. He didn't know of any barns over there. So they thought, well, probably it's an airplane down. I got to get over there. So he found a way over there. And when he got there, he said it was a round disc. It was split open, and there were several, one or two aliens on the ground. He told a friend it wasn't from here. And so he's the guy that pretty well discovered it.
So he actually described seeing alien bodies.
Yeah, we think there were 4, and we recently had some new information that came to us by way of the internet and some other detective work, and apparently there were 2 alive, and they tried to get them to Los Alamos, where they had a place where they could keep them, and one died on the way, and the one lived for about 3 years. And apparently the guy that was in charge of the cleanup was in contact with the alien, and he went up to visit him at Los Alamos several times.
I see. So Now there was an archaeological team as well who
Yes, yeah, that was a complication. This would be a big complication for them because the guy is getting ready to do his PhD, and the morning he's ready to start, they see the night before something come down. They thought it was a big meteor. Well, meteorites cost you could get a pound one. Sold $50,000, so they were pretty. They were thinking maybe they'd find a meteorite on government land or something, And they saw this lighted thing come down, so they went over in the morning before they started their archaeological dig and saw this craft laying there. And then Mr. Barnett had driven up by earlier, and they walked. They had to go through a fence. It's called a drift fence. That's where some of your folks know what a drift fence is. It's essentially not a pasture, but it's a fence to keep cattle from drifting from one place to another, and to kind of keep them in a bunch, essentially. And they couldn't find a gate, so they crawled under the fence, crawled down this gully, and there was Mr. Barnett standing there scratching his head with looking at the UFO, two bodies. So they had to, make a pretty tough choice. This guy wasn't going to get his PhD from Harvard the next year, which is where he was enrolled. If he went back there and said he just found a crashed UFO, how about the money for my dig next year? And I don't think it would have worked out at all. So they kept quiet about it, which was what the Army wanted them to do. And they leaned on Barnett to keep quiet about it. But after a while, after he retired about 10 years later, in 1959, I believe, 58, 59, he began to talk a little more about it. So he only told relatives out of town, so there wouldn't be any. And he and his wife never mentioned it on the phone.
So when this craft was found, how did the military get involved? I mean, when did they find out about it? I think if I had found it, they would have been the last people I called.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't call anybody from there. They didn't have a telephone down there until 1989.
Oh.
We're talking remote here. And we think probably a spotter plane came up to look for it out of the White Sands, Alamogordo area. They may have seen something on radar and were able to check the last place that they could see it. And they were there within 45 minutes of Mr. Barnett and the archaeologist. And so they had apparently information that something had crashed there. And we think they left a crew there for a week or so cleaning up. There's lots of little pieces of foil and stuff. And we had everything analyzed, really detailed analysis of everything we found.
Yeah, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the analysts and what was discovered. I'd love to get into all that.
Well, essentially, the thing that was the most laying around, and we found some of it, was pieces of foil. That looked like foil from a barbecue or something, and we didn't think much about it. We picked up everything that was there, and later we had it analyzed and found out it was a coated foil. It had some of the foil had 12 or 15 different pieces of elements on it on one side. And on a coating, and on a base aluminum, and we didn't have anything like that in 1947. Our aluminum foil is pretty much 99% aluminum, and you look on the box and you'll see a Reynolds wrap or Alcoa or anywhere we got up there, and you'll see that it's almost 99% aluminum. And this had 8 or 10 additives, and then there was a whole bunch of trace elements that were under 100 pounds per, they call it 100 parts per million. And so we only counted the ones that were higher as being added probably by the aliens for some reason. But we had no idea what it was for. It was little pieces like you'd find, after somebody bought a hot dog or something like that, they found a wadded up thing.
Yeah.
And these were flat and quite crinkled. And we have some of that on the webpage. If anybody's on that www.ufocrashbook.com, the first thing at the top is some of the foil. We have one of our Navajo workers with a metal detector there, and that was the foil we found. And we found about 15 pieces of this. And by the way, they didn't sell foil in the area until 1955. It was very slow getting in there because the ranch people had ways of cooking, and they weren't freezing yet. There's no power, not a lot of power to freeze. So they'd cook up everything, and I asked one gal what she did with the leftovers. She said, well, they went to the dogs. So they had everything, all the bases pretty well covered. But this foil was just too much of it to be a coincidence, and they weren't using it till 10 years later. They used it for freezer wrap, actually. Then
now
freezer burned down.
You
can see it there on the web page.
Yeah. Oh, I'm looking at the pictures now, and some some great photos. Now,
we had. I'm a photography teacher, and I won't let anything out that's not good and sharp.
Right.
And some of the other stuff we found also was coated with various coatings of elements. And now we did find an I-beam, which is kind of our holy grail, essentially, because Roswell was pretty well talked about I-beams there. But ours is a big fat thing, 13 inches long, 13 and a quarter, and 2 inches wide on the flanges. And we actually think it was an H-beam. H-beams hold horizontal loads, and I-beams they use it for skyscrapers, to hold a vertical load. And we think the H-beam underneath the floor of a UFO would be pretty appropriate because it would certainly be a horizontal load.
Right. So now, I would have to ask, how does the military miss stuff like this? Because you would think that they would get a fine-tooth comb and make sure nobody had
we saw those pictures on Unsolved Mysteries where the military guys crawling side by side, picking up, grasshopper legs or what have you, And we get the feeling that this is the way it was. Well, this stuff was scattered over a quarter of a mile, probably 100 yards wide. The foil was. The heavy wreckage was pretty well in the trajectory of the craft that was crashing, but the foil had been blown around over the years and covered over with sand and dirt. We're in the Royal here, which is a sandy, dry gulch, essentially what it is, and it occasionally handles flash floods. So that's how the drainage works in western New Mexico. You go to the nearest arroyo, and the water runs away. So that's kind of where we were. It was about a mile from the road, and we were able to drive right down to it. But we thought that also. But here's the problem: we have rattlesnakes there, not a lot of them, but enough of them where you don't want to take your hand in a hole.
Yeah.
We have buckbrush, which is kind of prickly. And it's not like an open prairie where you got all these Army guys crawling on their hands and knees, looking like a prayer visual in Iraq.
True, and back then they probably didn't have the technology that we have today, where they could scan through the soil and stuff, right?
Well, they had metal detectors, but they weren't. World War II, the metal detector was made to pick up the pin of a mine, maybe a quarter of an inch across. And it would have been quite a lot of work to get a lot of metal detectors up there. So what they did, essentially, was pick up what they could and cover up what they didn't want to take with them. Well, they didn't know there was 14.5 inches of rainfall there every year. And within 5 years, a lot of stuff was on the surface again. Mm-hmm. And no one goes down there. So we found it, 1994.
And so now...
Stayed there till 2012. Pretty well, getting our stuff in it.
And Art, these metals were then tested, correct?
Yeah, we had what's called an ICP-MS testing, which essentially is I don't have the name for it right now, but it's a test that was developed in 1989. And essentially you grind up a piece of metal, and you put it in a medium, a liquid, and then you put that liquid into a chamber of 26,000 degrees. And it will immediately read all the elements in it and put them on a graph in about 15, 20 seconds. So we have come a long way since 1947.
Yeah.
So we suspect a lot of this stuff, if the government still has it in warehouses, would probably never have had the testing we did.
Do you think there was enough there where they could have reverse engineered and I know I'm kind of getting off a little bit here, but we see UFOs today, and I always say that the pictures and sightings and stuff from back 1940s, 1950s is more credible because everyone didn't have Photoshop at their desk. And
yeah, you're right. They do get more credible. Well, we have something incredible to tell you. We found some information that had been released years ago. It had been classified as top secret, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff came from Washington, D.C. to Alamogordo, New Mexico to see that parts of that craft. And here is a little thing about his itinerary. His name was General Nathan Twining. And I can give people some of the information, and they can pull it up on the Internet if you want to a little later.
Sure.
And here's a synopsis of what we're talking about here. On Monday, July 7th, Lieutenant General Nathan Twining of the Air Material Command, he was, by the way, based in Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio, unexpectedly flew to the Army Airfield in New Mexico, the Alamogordo Army Airfield. By the way, that later became Holloman about a year later. Mm-hmm. And then he made a stop at Kirkland Air Base in Albuquerque on a 4-day trip. And he remained in the area until July 11th, although reports initially reporters had been told he was somewhere in Washington. Actually, he was over about 2,000 miles away. But he was scheduled to stop in Boeing aircraft up in Seattle. And he called the guy and canceled. And a friend of mine, Stanton Friedman, who worked with us on this project, a lot of you may have heard of him.
Oh, yes.
Got a letter from the General Twining's daughter, who was headed in his correspondence, of about July 7th or 8th, somewhere in there. And he had written this guy in Boeing, a very important sudden matter that developed here came up, and I won't be able to go to our meeting. He canceled the meeting with Boeing over a B-29 modification to go down here. We know it must have been important. Yeah. And we think it was this crash site because the Roswell one was still on the ground. They hadn't picked it up yet. It was up at the place called the debris field. And we think that's the same day, about the 7th, that Jesse Marcel went out there with a CIA agent they had at the base called named Cabot. Sheridan Cabot. And so we have our wreckage is already in the laboratory, and they're just now finding the Roswell material, and they haven't picked it up yet. So we've got 5 or 6 days ahead of the Roswell craft on this craft. So we're nothing else landed that we know of for anywhere. And we think why he was so excited about getting there is it's the only craft intact. They've had pieces all the time, but this one they could really have back engineered if it was possible.
Oh, so
we think it was a craft intact with a split in the side and 4 bodies, one of which lived.
So this one actually skeeched along the ground. It didn't actually crash. It
would crash. It skipped, Michael. It skipped. At one place, we found where it skipped down, and of course, we found a lot of wreckage in a circular area. So it was on the surface. They said, let's dig down till we find it. Well, the rain had taken away some of the loose soil, and there may have been stuff there that the Army missed, you see. Yeah. They were there in July in the dry part of the year, and the next year we had rain and wind and snow, and some of the stuff got covered up. And over the years, things do get covered up. But we found some of the stuff is, 2 or 3 inches deep. We didn't dig any deeper than 6 inches for any of it. So literally, this stuff is on the surface. So they were very excited about getting that UFO down at that they had taken down to White Sands Missile Base down there, Alamogordo, New Mexico. And we think this is the first full UFO that crashed. They've had other ones with pieces, but this is the first one that was in reasonable shape.
Now, I wonder why, I guess this is kind of one of those weird questions, but I wonder why, their buddies didn't come and rescue them quick,
Well, that's a good question. I had been asked that on Art Bell once, at least once. And we think that these they were little gray aliens like you see pictures of. They may have been clones. Half of the crew may have been artificially made, and Colonel Corso said they had taken extraterrestrial biological entities and cloned them. That's like Dolly the sheep, remember?
Yeah.
And then they put parts in these little bodies that would withstand the rigors of space travel. Well, we found one of the parts, and if you look down on that page, that home page,
I'm there.
There's a thing down that says possible artifact of body part, and that's two views of it. And the thing is about 4 inches across, and one end looks kind of funny, like a crab pinching, but there's about 4 inches across, about 3/4 inch thick, and it was nothing that any of our medical people had ever seen. And it's high-density polyethylene, by the way, which does not cause any problems in the body. The body doesn't reject high-density polyethylene. So the aliens must use it, too. We have hundreds of things we use it for medically.
Boy, it's too bad, nowadays, the way technology has blossomed, and especially with forensics, it's too bad they can't try to retest this and dig in it a little bit and see if they can find some DNA.
Well, I am pretty sure that the government checked all their, covered all their bases on this item. And it may be that they told somebody in industry about it, and they have improved the polyethylene that we use now in we have artificial joints and part of hip joints, and just about everything on the body is artificial. It can be made of polyethylene. And the body doesn't reject it if it's under the skin, see? So it very well may be that some medical people knew about it, learned about it, and improved the high-density polyethylene we have. They use it now for children's play equipment. You see little wagons made of it, and all kinds of things.
You're right, Art, too, because we're looking at seeing technologies now that we used to see as just Star Trek and Star Wars type stuff, movie stuff, and now look, I mean, DARPA's getting ready this summer to test a new laser weapon. I mean, they'll be shooting lasers instead of missiles.
Yeah. Well, we have this 90 pictures in the book, Michael, and it can be obtained through the website, and it's Amazon. Can I give the name of the book?
Oh, any information you want, you go right ahead.
It's called "Finding the UFO Crash" at San Augustine. We spelled it with AUGUSTIN. Finding the UFO Crash in San Augustine. And if anybody Googles my name, that'll show up, and among other things. They got everything there but my criminal record, which I wouldn't let them put on. And Finding the UFO Crash in San Augustine is the book. It's 135 pages with 90 pages of photographs. 90 photographs in it. And we've been working on it since about 2002. About for 13 years.
I see.
So we recently found out that that material that the general had written a report about what he saw in the interior of that craft. You want me to tell you about it?
Oh, please do.
Yeah, this is the first one we know of that. A second here. First one we know of that we got inside, and it was whole enough to make the description. Here's what General Twining's staff did this, and they had it done by the 9th of September, and about a month after this crash. And they wouldn't say where it had crashed. But we know now where it was because there wouldn't be any record of where we were if it hadn't crashed there. So they left that blank. And anyhow, here's what they described. This is General Twine's report to Air Force generals and admirals of all branches of service. This was a top secret memo in 1947. They say we had the manufacture of these things as follows: a circular disc-shaped platform, and does not resemble any design currently under development, and it had a lack of any propulsion system, power plant, intake, exhaust, or anything like that, or propellers for propulsion. And that's not news, but it's interesting here for general. The inability of the German scientists at Fort Bliss in White Sands to identify it as anything made by the Germans was a real good idea. They were staying down at Fort Bliss, down in the southern end of Texas, and apparently Werner von Braun came up. He was in charge of the German missile programs that they got out of Germany right after the war. And another couple people down there came to look at it. And one of the reasons they may have gone down there is that let these guys see it to get their opinions. And now, do your listeners know who Dr. Oppenheimer is?
He's
the father of the atomic bomb. He was there.
The father of who?
The atomic bomb.
Oh, yeah.
J. Robert Oppenheimer. And he was the guy that was in charge of the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos. He was there. He gave his opinions. And they thought it might be a Russian thing or something. And so they looked for any kind of ID numbers or instructions in any kind of English, and they didn't find anything at all. If it had been Russian, they at least have some part numbers, on it. And nothing at all was there. So it wasn't manufactured in Russia, and it certainly wasn't manufactured here. And on the interior of the craft, they discovered what was under the floor, which was an possible atomic engine. And Dr. Oppenheimer and Dr. Karaman, who was a high scientist in the U.S. in those days, von Karaman, the possibility exists that the craft itself comprised a propulsion system, thus allowing the reactor to function as a heat exchanger, and probably may run on hydrogen. Well, there's unlimited hydrogen in the atmosphere. Well, they've got a built-in gas tank right there. So apparently, whatever they were doing, were able to use the Earth's atmosphere in their propulsion system.
I bet you, Art, that they're using what Tesla called the free energy, that exists, that we're told doesn't exist. I bet somehow they're able to use that energy but if they do use the energy from the planet, then what happens in space? Do they charge themselves up?
These craft, we don't think came in space.
Oh.
We think they came from a mothership.
Ah, okay.
That may have been up in the troposphere somewhere, up near where our satellites. So some of our astronauts and people have reportedly seen round ships with hollow ends like cigars, twice as long as a football field.
Oh, kind of like carriers, if you will.
Yes, exactly. And these things are stacked in there like poker chips. It's incredible.
It is incredible.
Here's the power room underneath the floor. A donut-shaped tube, approximately 35 feet diameter, made of what appears to be plastic material, was under the floor. The tube appeared to be filled with clear substance, possibly heavy water. A large rod centered inside the tube was wrapped in a coil of what appeared to be copper. And they had no idea what it was, but they think it might have been a storage battery or something like that held power. So that's pretty much what they found underneath inside, and they found something that looked like a little typewriter, strange keys on it.
But here we've got the internet now. We've got keyboards and
a little joystick
there. Oh, a little joystick.
This is a report for the General Twining staff to all the generals in the U.S. Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps.
Amazing.
Now, we're in the process of getting checked out to make sure before we put it back in the book again. But it boggles the mind.
Yeah, that does blow the mind. That's fascinating. I mean, and this is an account from a general, right?
General Nathan Twining. He had his credentials were. He was later, 3 years later, appointed by Eisenhower as chief of staff. Here's some of his credentials. By the way, he was born in 1897 and at Monroe, Wisconsin, and he had been an officer in World War I, but just got out of West Point in time for the war to be over. He had another one coming up. He didn't know it about 20 years later. And he was chief of staff of the United States Army Air Force from 53 to 57. As chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 57 to 60, appointed by President Eisenhower. Very highly placed area. Now, the guy apparently had a family living near Portland, Oregon, and some of the information came from one of his daughters who had gone out and looked at some files for our researcher Stanton Friedman.
Yeah, I've had Stan on quite a few times through the years, and
yeah. I was on the phone to him today. He's going to retire probably this next year.
Oh, he is.
Yeah. So they back up to the floor again. They thought that the craft moves through the atmosphere, somehow draws up hydrogen from the atmosphere and by an induction process, and generates atomic fusion by drawing hydrogen up. And then apparently the air outside of the craft would be ionized, thus propelling the craft forward. And that's part of the description that the General Twining staff made. I'm sure he didn't write this himself, but he was there seeing all this stuff, and he had a staff of 5 or 6 with him that made that trip.
Well, and
then they went up to Kirtland, which was a air base up near Albuquerque, and apparently they took some of the equipment up there, and then we heard that they had buried a disc there for a while. We don't know why. We found a round hole. We didn't know what it was. So we may go back and check that round hole with a metal detector. We did it the first time.
Well, that's incredible. Now, they still have the bodies, I take it.
I assume we would be looking here at I don't think we'd store them. I imagine over the years, these may be in the first bodies. That may be why General Twining was so excited to get there. Canceled his, important engagements. We found a letter where he'd written the president of one of the Boeing aircraft, and they were supposed to do some modification on a B-29 in those years. That's 47, and so this would just supersede everything. We supposedly had a craft crash with a body or two in near Cape Girardeau, Missouri, in 1944, I think. And there was a minister who said that he had held a service and helped intern the body, but no one knows where it is up there.
Is anybody significant, in this crash? Like any witnesses or anything? Is anybody still around, or?
Yeah, we have one guy who's, by the way, not too good health right now, but he's still with us. He was 5 years old. He came there with his father and brother and a couple of cousins. And he talked about this in the 90s. And some of the UFO people in the United States, they said, oh, poo-poo, this guy, what does he know? And it kind of discredited him. He'd said some things they disagreed with and this kind of thing. And so this UFO field is can be kind of cutthroat if you look at it carefully, because you have a lot of people out there who are working for themselves and themselves only, and that's a little hard to cope with sometimes.
Well, yeah, they're out to, gain, and then they add all these other aspects to a story that aren't true, and what it does is, in the long run, is it discredits the whole topic, and that upsets me because, I mean, come on, you look at us, we're on this little blue marble, and you're not going to tell me that everything, out there is just dead and we're it. I mean, I know that we're...
Well, it has to... they're talking now about... I'm a second-generation UFO researcher. There have been... a generation generally is considered 30 years. And my first 30 years, I was... at the time I was teaching, and then the last 30 years I've been researching. So... I turn on some of these radio shows now, and I hear some of the darndest stuff you ever heard. Somebody's got whipping up a big batch of something in their bathtub. They're going to sell it at the next garage sale. I mean, I can't believe what I hear.
Oh, I know. It's incredible, and believe me, doing what I do, I've been doing this for almost 8 years now, and I've heard some doozies. And, I'll listen to anybody, but when it comes down to it, I mean, it comes down to what you can prove. And that's why I love talking with you because, you guys, you got your fingers dirty, you got into it, and, you've been honest about it. I mean, you're not feeding any wild stories. I mean, this crash I think it's fascinating. And, these bodies now, I do have a couple questions here because I know people, it's almost like I could hear their energy hitting me in the head. And some of the questions out there would be, how did he know that these were alien bodies? Because there are those out there who claim that there were secret operations going on between the Russians and the United States, and that these could have been test dummies. But I think he could tell the difference, right?
Yeah, I've seen pictures of them, and believe me, you're looking here at a 4 and 4.5 foot creature. His or her arms hang to his knees, literally, and the head is pear-shaped, inverted, very large cranium, just little tiny holes for ears. And we think some of them that are clones look like the biological alien, but they may have just made something. Some of them have a mouth. You look inside, there's nothing there, but solid gums. And I haven't talked to anybody who's done an autopsy yet on these things. But believe me, if you saw one, you'd know it was not from here. And this guy that Barnett said that they weren't from here. And so he was sure there was a spaceship in outer space. And he was kind of on tenterhooks with his job. He was supposed to be an expert in public relations. They'd hired him because there'd been some problems with previous soil management people. And so he couldn't go down and now see what he'd found. And so he stopped by and talked to his boss on the way home that night. And they agreed to put the lid on it till they could get a hold of some people up in Albuquerque at the Department of Agriculture. And they also encouraged him to keep quiet about it. And that wasn't the problem, because he wasn't the kind of guy that wanted to be, wasn't a braggart. He did tell a few people, and but he never wrote anything about it. But the people that we told say that he was quite an honest man. He was a lifelong Rotarian. And the people, people who get into the Rotary Club are usually one or two just like him in the community. They want a diverse group of people, and they want people who are willing to serve others. And so here's a guy who's just as model a citizen as you'd ever find. And his wife belonged to a church group, and she kept a diary, but none of this was in there that year.
And to think that, this technology, this craft even, is sitting somewhere in some warehouse being kept from we the people, that really, it troubles me. You know how many people, I mean, you know, have passed on, never, you know, knowing the truth, when so many years ago they could have just opened up and said, hey, guess what, we're not alone. But they refused to do it, and so now this lie goes on for such a long time. Now they're never going to, you know, admit to it. We're going to have to catch them somehow.
Well, we think that they were really afraid the Russians would find out about it. And at that time, this was 2 years before Russia exploded their first atomic bomb. And Russia already had espionage agents at Los Alamos. They knew what we were doing, and some of them actually gave information. And we had that was the Roseburg trial in the 1947-48. Julius and Ethel Roseburg, and that's a New York thing, and they were involved in it. And so we were afraid. We thought we might get an edge if we didn't tell anybody. And I tend to agree with that. Why should we tell the Russians we got something from outer space? Or they've had their own landings and their own crashes in the last 25, 30 years. So these things are all over. I have never seen one, but I always talk to people who say, "Well, I saw one of those."
Art, I have had in my life, I've had what I'll say 6 sightings only, but 3 of them I knew I was looking at an intelligent craft that there's nothing I ever seen before. Now,
were any of them daylight?
Oh, yes. As a matter of, oh yeah, the one here, it was on Christmas Eve here in South Carolina, back about 3 years ago, and it was hiding behind a cloud, and it came out, and I thought it was a kid's balloon dangling around up there. So my wife goes and gets me binoculars, and I take a closer look, and I'll be damned, it looked like it came right off the Jetsons, that cartoon. I mean, it had the bubble on top, the bubble on bottom, and the disc in the middle. Oh,
there's about 3 dozen different configurations of them. If you see one in the daytime, you really probably have something to look at. There's all kinds of lights at night, and we can make a lot of errors at night.
Yeah.
But if you see an aluminum craft hovering and standing still in the air, chances are you're looking at a UFO. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, and that's what, you know, it sat there. It's almost like it knew I seen it, and it was playing with me. It'd come out from behind the cloud, it'd do a couple little zip zaps back and forth, go back behind the cloud, and then finally, after about, I'd say 15, 20 minutes of watching this thing, it just, zoop, was gone. Took off across the sky. Well,
as they say, if you get a light flash at one of them, they'll flash back. I've heard that, but that would be the friendly ones. There are some out there, Michael, that aren't very friendly.
Right.
And I had a gal one time said to me, "Well, what are my chances of being abducted?" I said, "Well, how old are you?" She said, "Well, you really want to know?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm 43." I said, "Well, you're 4 years too late. They won't take them over 39." And that's what I had read at the time somewhere. I just thought I'd pass it on to her. She goes, "Well, I'm sure glad to hear that." So they were harvesting sperm and eggs from males and females, and probably trying to build get some of our DNA to put in some of theirs. Because I think they probably had a big one group abducted thousands of people all over the world, and they're pretty quiet about their work because if anybody knows about it, they get they try to take steps to keep getting abducted. But it could be you could get a group or another group that wants to take a look at your innards, and I mean, who wants to face that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I said this before. Look at what we do as human beings. We'll go out in the ocean. We'll abduct a shark or a dolphin, and we'll tag them. Sure. We'll chip them, if you will, and then let them go, and we keep track of them.
Well, there's we've got probably at least someone guessed it. We have had at least 12 different civilizations, different ones from different planets, coming to Earth in the last 50, 100 years. And at the time that this one was found in 1947, was just after Kenneth Arnold had discovered, the same month, Kenneth Arnold had discovered those UFOs flying around Mount Rainier. And that kind of kicked it all off. And so I don't think we'd had one on the ground to see what it looked like before. I think that's why the military got all excited and went out there, general finding. So they are not all benevolent, so one needs to exercise caution. That some of our government may have similar craft. I know there was a gal down in Texas, two gals, a mother and her daughter, whose car got stopped and the UFO right over the top of it, and it was spewing out some kind of red light, and they both got radiation burns.
Yeah, I heard about that one.
Yeah, Cash Lander was the name of the two ladies, and they saw helicopters, big old helicopters, ushering away the UFO. And they said, well, that must be ours. So they went to the nearest air base and took their overnight bags and everything and thought they were going to get some treatment. And they said, well, ladies, we don't have anything like that. We don't know what you're talking about. So here's two ladies with radiation burns going to the sick bay and thinking they're going to spend the night. And the guy said, we don't know what you're talking about, you know. So you can't take anything for granted with these things, I'll tell you for sure.
Yeah, this other one, before we take our break, I'll tell you quickly, this other one that my wife and I seen, we seen it together. This was like a mothership. It was probably 1 to 2 football fields in size. It was huge, and it was at night, and it was, lit up. It looked like 4 cigar-shaped objects flying through the sky in uniform, but it was one big object. You could just see, you couldn't see the space in between the lights, and it moved over. It was probably about, I don't know, maybe 100 feet in the air or something like that. I mean, if I could have got up on a couple ladders, I probably could have hit it with a rock. It was that close, but it looked like all energy. It's just total energy. And the only thing I could call it is a mothership, because it wasn't nothing else. I mean, I never seen nothing like that in my life.
The first guy to come up with a picture of one was George Adamski in 1953. And he had a book called Flying Saucers Have Landed, and he authored it with Desmond Leslie, a British author. And they had several pictures in there that he took with a 6-inch telescope, close-up of UFOs. The book is not now in print anymore, but I did investigate him for the NICAP group when I was in Kansas City. But there were a lot of people who were claiming that they'd been taken to Venus and Mars and around the Earth, and in those days we had nothing to go around the Earth except longitude and latitude lines, and there was a lot of people coming out wanting to get involved with speaking and writing books and what have you. So if you were convincing enough, you'd be invited to a conference to talk.
Yeah,
I think this is kind of what they're vying for, and it's true today. But people are far more sophisticated today than they were in the 1950s about UFOs.
Well, if they had ever taken me and done anything, I don't remember any of it. So,
well, there's apparently some kind of a blue light they use. It's like anesthesia, and so chances are you wouldn't remember it. Some people can remember something under hypnosis. And that was a famous case of Betty and Barney Hill in 1964, I think. They were up in New Hampshire, and they tried to get away from this thing, and it came out. They got into a dead-end road. At the far end of the road was this UFO sitting there. So the guy driving the car starts to back up, and his motor dies. And apparently they looked outside, and there were some of these gray aliens, and they, for reason no one would know, opened the door, and they were taken into the craft, and they were examined medically. And I remember one funny thing that happened. By the way, James Earl Ray, the famous actor, we've seen in many shows, played Barney Hill in a movie, and I did it years ago, and so he was laying on this table, kind of strapped down, and the guy comes in and grabs a hold of his teeth, and he had false teeth, and his upper plate came out. Well, they were pretty looking around. Well, what's going on here, you know? And apparently, he and his wife got to comparing notes, and they had grabbed her teeth, and hers was still all in there. So they decided to go grab his and see what happened. Well, he was wearing a big false plate in front. I guess they got their eyes full of this guy with his teeth coming out with thick gum. So it was kind of funny that, but they didn't know we had made false teeth. And you know, that shows you how far away they are.
Well, they may need some, because you said if they open their mouths, there's nothing there, just gum. So maybe that's why they were like, well, wow, well, maybe we can make a trade deal with these guys.
Yeah, I think those that are they look like the regular aliens, but I think they're clones. And you ask why they didn't come pick up their people. Well, we think they're probably expendable, and we think that the craft is sealed, hermetically sealed, like you would seal something in an airplane. And if it gets into anywhere in the atmosphere and that breaks it, that whatever they're breathing, they have trouble breathing after that. So apparently they didn't breathe our air very well.
I see. So, but still, even if they're extendable, you would think that they wouldn't want to leave any evidence or any way, you know, for us to start investigating on it. You know.
Well, I don't think they were as security conscious as we were. We had a lot to lose if the Russians got ahead of us on this thing. So it'd be easy to keep it quiet there, but. They don't seem to be necessarily hiding anymore. Some of these big triangular crafts come over. They're about twice as long as a football field and as deep, and a couple hundred yards wide. And there's been many people that have seen these. And low. Mm-hmm. One hovered over Belgium one time, and the whole police force saw it. About 1989 or something like that, somewhere in there. One went up the Hudson River in New York, and very slowly, about late 80s, and they were about like a big slice of cheese. You know these hats that people from Minnesota wear when they go to Super Bowls?
Yeah.
Made out of cheese? Well, apparently that's what those things look like flying in the air, and a big wedge of cheese. Although they're black color, not yellow, and so seeing somebody wearing one of those at a football game, it reminds me of those black triangles. But they don't seem to be hiding anymore. I think they may have decided that it's time for people saw them. And boy, there's a guy named George Filer that has a newsletter, by the way, for your listeners. That's free. He does want a contribution every year if you can see your way to it. And it's called Filer's Files. And you can find it on the internet. F-I-L-E-R-S, Files, F-I-L-E-S. And he puts out his newsletter every week, and he'll have at least a dozen photographs of UFOs taken around the world. It's quite an interesting newsletter.
It sounds like it. And we've got to take a break. When we come back,
anywhere from 300 years to 1,200 years ahead of us scientifically. Ooh. And they probably aren't even using radios at all. And here we have radio telescopes out there. On a plane in St. Augustine, we had 28 of them up there in a place called the VLA. And a friend of mine worked near there. She's a government lady, and she went over there one time to an open house, and she'd seen one about 100 feet across, sitting out over the highway about a mile away from these radio telescopes. They're big dishes, like satellite dishes, 80 feet in diameter.
Jeez.
And she went in and talked to one of the guys, and said, well, we've never seen anything like that out here. She said, well, if you guys had put a window or two in this place, you might see something. and they were going out millions and millions of miles out in space. One of these things sitting out there in the front yard. As a matter of fact, Jodie Foster in the movie Contact, did that come to your part of the country years ago? Contact, the film Contact.
Oh yes, it did.
Well, she's sitting on front of one of those dishes when she starts hearing, and she says a naughty word and got in her car, and apparently they were trying to communicate. But she was right there. They did part of the film there at that place, which was 30 miles north of where we found the crashed craft.
Yeah, well, and I think that they have been trying to communicate. I like looking into the crop circles as well because I find those fascinating. And some people say, oh, it's guys with boards on their feet. Oh no, not all these. They're not.
But you could make a circle or a path with a board on your feet. But those guys, I understand, both of them are gone and did the good-looking crop circles. I've been in contact with Colin Andrews, who was the expert in them.
Yeah.
And he said the general thinking now is that the messages aren't for us. They're sort of time travelers writing messages for each other. That's interesting.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, and so we've got everybody's a brother out there, saying prayers and what have you, and which is just fine. But I have not noticed anything particularly that we would call religious about any of the activities. Apparently, they do believe in a creator, and I don't really know much more than that.
Yeah, and for all we know, there might be many creators. I mean, look what we're doing now here on this planet. We're able to pretty much clone. We could go get the T-Rex and bring it back. We could bring back the woolly mammoth if we want. We can, they could pretty much control the weather. There's things that they could do that would almost, seem godly in some sense. Yeah,
they've been working on that weather for quite a while. And we used to have a airport here that had a morning flight coming up from the LA area. We're in Southern Oregon here. And they'd go out there with ice crystals and some chemical and ice crystals and shovel them out of the back of an airplane. I said, what kind of a rig are you using? Well, we have a hole cut in a Piper Cub. There's a guy back there with a dustpan. Shovel them out. And we let the prop wash then spread them around. So we used to go to school. I was teaching here in this little town, and you used to go to school and see little white tufts of frost laying around. Well, that's what happened. They'd seize the clouds to get the airplane to have better visibility coming in.
Uh-huh. So now these ETs, I want to go back to these little guys again. Now I read where they had like gray jumpsuits on, so I'll have to ask: does this mean that when somebody says they've seen a gray, could it be that they're in a suit and that they're not actually gray underneath it?
Well, that's a good question. They have been known to be. The people who have had some time to look at them, observations, say their skin is pinkish gray. And if your listeners are anywhere near that website, UFOcrashbook.com, I'll show them a shoe we got. Probably belongs to an alien. At the bottom of that website page, and scroll down 3 pages, and there's a shoe and a quarter, and a little tiny shoe down there.
Yes, sir.
And that website page, and that shoe was 1 inch across the instep, 4 7/8 inches long. We were able to dig around underneath the shoe and found some red fabric, and we think the shoe was red. Now that'd be pretty sharp looking with gray uniforms. And one person said, well, they saw some red piping, which was a little border edging, and the women talk about the clothing. And though this shoe had once been red, it was set out 50 years in the desert and buried. We found it where after a rainstorm it kind of worked its way up through the sand. And yeah.
So it's like a little baby shoe, or smaller.
Well, we took it to Nike. Nike has a headquarters here in Oregon, the Portland area. And I had an appointment with a guy up there, and he thought I was coming to apply for a job. And I said, no, I just want to talk about this shoe sole. Well, he said, what shoe sole? I said, well, it's one here. He says, well, he said, this is, and he took it to the lab. It was gone about 10 minutes. They wouldn't let me go back to their lab for some reason or other. And he said, this thing is 9 layers. He said, we couldn't afford to make a shoe like this and sell it. And then the infants, if you get it for an infant, they're going to wear out the toes. Well, I didn't have the courage to tell him that we didn't think it was an earthly infant from Earth wore the shoe. And so I just thanked him very much for the information. And you can't tell anybody you're working on UFOs. If you do, they shut the door in your face sooner or later. So we just keep it quiet, publish what we could find.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, as soon as you say that, it's the eyes rolled. People either don't take it serious, some people, or it scares them. Or the other
alternative, just like you said earlier in the show. Hey, I saw one. Let me tell you about it. We get a lot of those. So there's the third possibility: people who have seen them halfway believe in them. So it's all gamuts there.
Yeah, well, I believed in them before I seen them, and it's not that I don't like to go on beliefs. I like to go with the facts, but you can't deny again. Even as a little kid, I'd look up at the sky, and it's not like God decided, hey, let's decorate the sky with a bunch of pretty little lights. That stuff's out there for a reason. And I think we're just a small drop in the bucket compared to what's out there.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that the lights in the sky are actually 99% of them are suns.
Yeah.
Several of them are from our solar system, which we have 9 planets now. But those are suns with planets revolving around them. Those are not stars themselves. The sun is a star, of course. But each one of those light specks out there may have planets revolving around in a solar system like us. So what you're looking at the night is the sun.
That's right.
Of a small solar system.
Yeah, absolutely, a small sun. And if you look, on a nice clear night, sometimes you could see a wobble to it because there's planets going around pulling on it.
Well, there's estimated to be out there probably 100,000 or so planets that are life-sustaining, similar to Earth. And, of course, you don't know where they are. They could be in the Stone Age. They could be man hasn't developed yet, still in the trees, and who knows? And that may interest them here to come down and look at our dinosaurs, but I didn't think they want to get out of the craft. That would be very interesting to be here 63 million years ago.
Yeah, I wonder if they were able to abduct dinosaurs. I wonder if they.
No, the dinosaurs have been putting up a heck of a fight. There's a lot of bones out there.
That's correct. That's right. Yeah. So. And if there was, say, some kind of prehistoric civilization and we here on Earth found it, I feel sorry for them because you see how, the strings get pulled here on this planet with people in charge. Can you imagine what they do to a primitive race? Now, I think about that and I say, okay, what if the shoe's on the other foot? What if
we still have primitive races here on the planet?
Yeah, oh, I know.
And I think they're being protected now. I think there's 1 or 2 in South America. And you can't go to these encampments without government people with you, and they don't want you leaving anything. I think they let them have pots and pans, but I don't think they don't want them to have weapons or anything like that, And they wouldn't be around long. They probably aren't immune to our diseases and things. And of course, this is what wiped out many of our Indians early in the century before last. smallpox and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's a guy that said that he thinks he was working on some of the aliens from this craft, and a fellow wrote a book. He says he thinks some of the medical people who were doing autopsies had died. So that's the same thing, maybe from the ones that they had died at our side. They hadn't been there very long. They came down at probably 11 o'clock at night, and they were discovered about 12 hours later, 10:30, 11 in the morning. So they weren't out there. But people think, well, what about the animals? You know, and well, I've heard that the coyotes and people that really have a good sense of smell won't have anything to do with them, which is probably good for all of us.
Well, and again, I compare to, you look at what we're doing again today, they're able to grow organs in a lab, and grow these different body parts and skins and things like that. And you wonder if they're learning all this from those maybe artificial bodies. Now, when I say artificial, I don't mean, biological, yes, but created,
It wouldn't surprise me. We've had a lot of spin-offs from the space race. Teflon is one of them. And that was developed early on in the 60s, I believe, late 50s. We have clothing now with Teflon in it called Vortex. And it's so some of the stuff probably has leaked out. As a matter of fact, this Colonel Corso, who was with the Pentagon for a while, and then he came out and kind of wrote a book called The Day After Roswell. He said that they had pretty good knowledge of alien anatomy, and he's the one that said they thought they had taken the clones and added artificial parts to them, and that's where that came from. I had mentioned earlier. So we've got some people out there that are medically astute as to what's going on in around us, and I think they'd be very happy to see what was going on here. But I think there's a lot of risk. If we're going to talk about people dying, as soon as you cut somebody open, you better get a hazmat suit on real quick.
Yeah, I guess you'd want to do that. Now, I wonder. I used to talk with what's his name? I can't remember his name now. The doctor who would take implants and stuff out of people.
Oh, it's Dr. Lear.
Dr. Lear, thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if people who were abducted and brought on these ships, I wonder if they ever came back with illnesses because of stuff that they weren't, their body couldn't handle.
Well, some claim to have had body parts put in them, but without any memory of it. And I knew a guy real well who had one next to his big toe, and it was about the size of a piece of rice, just a piece of cooked rice. And by the way, that guy has worked for Dr. Lear, has did all of our analysis for us. His name is Steve Colbert, and there's a free report for your listeners and yourself. Go to my website, www.ufocrashbook.com. And there's a blue button there. You push a Mental Analysis Colbert, and it gets you to another site. And there is a report there called Analysis Report on Metal Samples from the 1947 UFO Crash on the plane of San Augusta, New Mexico. Report author Steve Colbert, C-O-L-B-E-R-N. And he's done a 44-page thing in color of the material we found at our crash site. He had a really big materials lab back in Southern California, and they let him do some work on his own in their laboratory. And so that's free. If they want to download it, they can. We don't have anything that's the book costs a little money, but this report is free, 44 pages. It's quite good.
I see. Well, and this is all good, and this is stuff that needs to be continue to be rehashed because people very quickly forget about these things. And I hear so often people say, "Oh, there's no proof of extraterrestrials," and I beg to differ. I think there's plenty of proof.
I had comments reader comments in the Amazon page where they sell the book. By the way, we generally steer them to the Amazon page. They're buying the book from Amazon, not from us personally. And so I lost my train of thought.
Oh, we were talking about people who say there's no evidence of
oh, yes.
Yeah.
There's one guy in there, and one of you listeners want to look it up, go down to where it says, continue on down into where it says, about the author, how to order. And that'll get them down to the Amazon.com page, where they can order the book. I think it's somewhere around between $22 and $24, somewhere in that area. It's a heck of a good price, because this is 8.5 by 11 size. This is not the tiny little book with small print. It's big stuff. And so we found that some of the readers write in comments, and some of your listeners may want to read some of those comments. And one guy says, I no longer have to worry about convincing people about aliens. I just hand them a Campbell's book.
Right.
But it's all there. And he's right, it is. And I felt very gratified that he'd used that as an example.
I see. Well, I'm glad, I was checking out your website and I see all this, the pictures and things, and I'm glad that, you put the extra effort in to have this stuff analyzed and all the things that, people say, oh, there's no proof. And again, there's plenty of proof. And not just that, witness testimony. If 5 people came along, 3 people came along and said, well, I saw Art and Mike steal that car, you and I'd be convicted. But, you get a bunch of witnesses who've seen this craft, seen these bodies come out of it, and people still have doubt. I have no doubt. I know we're not alone. And
well, we know they're intelligently controlled. Some smaller ones we're pretty sure are robotic craft. But the larger craft with the domes, particularly, will have some entities in them. And now whether they are biological or not, we don't know. We're pretty sure that some of them are clones, but because of this artificial thing we found. I had a lot of doctors look at it, and they said, we've never seen it like this. And one guy said several doctors thought it looked like a bag, and another guy said, well, it looked like a pump to him. And you don't have to go very far to figure out what a pump might be doing. Pump body fluid to a body, And
yeah.
we found we opened it up a little bit, found some starch, kind of like tapioca starch, and inside that artifact at the bottom of the page, the bottom of the home page there, we found a artificial gold wire about the size of it was about a micron long and about several microns thick, and it was in the middle of a kind of a component of some kind. So the starch had caught this thing apparently coming through the alien, if that pieces from an alien, and the gold wire could possibly be from a monitoring piece or something like that. It's something that would go through a blood veins, without plugging them up. And we think that this thing was probably a part of a heart-lung situation that we hear the aliens have. And we're lucky enough to have one. I take it to conferences with you. I haven't been invited to a conference in at least a year now, so anybody out there has a UFO conference, I'll come. Just send me a ticket. So, and I'll bring some of the stuff with me.
Well, that's fantastic.
I bring that artifact with me, and it's UFO. And but the problem is these days they're out looking for all kinds of conspiracies, and I have a lady who wrote me and said, well, what can you offer our conference? I said, well, I can't offer anything about a conspiracy, but all I got is UFO wreckage, and you see it on the website.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason or other, I never heard from her again. Oh, I think she was looking for somebody to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know.
Yeah, that's about what it comes down to. You know, too often, and I've been talking about this too, the alternative media has been infiltrated so heavily, and in a way where, I mean, people are always looking for the big, glamorous, wild story, when, you know, the truth, they'll overlook it because it's boring. I mean, that's why Vince McMahon got smart and wrestling's fake. I mean, because if it was real, it'd be boring to everybody. Nobody'd buy a ticket. So, you know, and it's how life is, unfortunately.
Well, we had a guy from an Eastern organization, which I won't mention, come out and was going to do a real investigation of our site. And we took him down to the site. He was out there in blue latex gloves in the prickly heat, and the sagebrush and everything. And the rules that he had for looking at UFO stuff didn't fit our site very well. And he determined, in his wisdom, that we had found the wreck of a World War II airplane that went down in February of 1944. And he then proceeded to show us where we could find the airplane, just like it. And he said he'd seen an I-beam that came from that airplane. Well, on my page of my book, he really looks bad. I think we found where he was talking about. We found a little thing that looked like an I-beam, but it was only 4 inches long. And it was a bracket for a camera, an aero camera. And he didn't last too long with that organization. He came out here and had back there just started doing a lot of talking. He was from Maryland. And on page 121 of my book, I have a picture of everything. And what he saw and what he thought he saw and what we really found. And we've had a lot of people take pot shots at us, but we've so far been able to handle ourselves pretty well.
Well, you're always going to get these, we call them trolls. I call them agents, some of them. But you're always going to get these groups of people, especially with the internet, who will go out there and they're literally, that's their job, is to discredit anything they can. I mean, there's like, you know, if I was sitting here exposing the big secret about, say, I don't know, the drugstore or something, well, then they've got their little petty cash budget where they get these trolls to go into all the forums where you're talking about this stuff and try to debunk everything and discredit people. So,
well, one of the we've had people come to this site. We've invited, and some have found out where it was and invited themselves, and that's all right. But they risk getting shot by the rancher. But they don't know that. In any case, we've had people come out there and say, well, there's nothing here. And when they didn't have a shovel or metal detector, how would they know? They expect the UFO to be sticking out of the ground. So we have an awful lot of people want to work theory and criticize other people's work, but they don't do very, very much original work of their own.
That is very, very well said. There's too many people out there who are so quick to criticize somebody else and their theories or the work that they've put out there. And basically all they're writing on themselves is just a theory. They've never had an experience. They've never seen a UFO. They never even read about them until, well, they figured they could make a couple dollars off it or something. Then they start reading up on it.
Well, we have a lot of those people vying for spaces at some of the lectures now, and I don't even recognize I don't even know any of them anymore. I knew some of the old timers that went out, but I don't recognize these people talking about the New World Age and unlimited love and you name it. And, once in a while, I get somebody asks me if the government's ever been around here. And I tell them the fact that I was sitting one day in my front window, my computer, and I saw this black van pull up outside. And I'd gone to my lawyer and said, what do I do if they show up? She said, you don't do anything. You hand them my card and say you're represented. You don't even have to talk to them. So I pinned the card by the front door, and I went back in great trepidation, went over there. They rang the doorbell. The dog raised hell as usual. And, finally got to the door, and there was two Mormon missionaries dressed in black coats and white shirts. I said, I don't know what you guys are drinking, but come on in. So we had gave I think gave us a hot lemonade or something. So, but it's as close as I've ever come, and it's quite a feeling to think you're going to be spending the night with somebody's polka, you know.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
All they want me to do is read the Bible. Well, fine, that's okay. I'll read it. Come on in, you know. So I was so relieved to find out they weren't from the CIA or somewhere. They probably still talk about the guy that invited them in and wanted to talk their arm off. Because I was sure glad they weren't from the government. But I haven't had anybody come at all, and nor have I heard from anybody.
Well, you know, nowadays nowadays especially, they rather than make a house visit, you know, they've got other ways of doing it. They could use technologies to deter you, like send you messages, and then the messages disappear after you've read them. They've got stuff like that. Now, I don't believe everybody who comes out and says that they're being tracked by the government, because as you know, nowadays it's like every Tom, Dick, and Harry is got the feds following them around, and
well, that's supposed to be a status symbol. Yeah. I would just soon pass if that's what a status symbol is about. I don't want people following me around, and but I may be so far under the radar no one cares. You know, so we're just keep it on trucking. You know, there's nothing much else you can do.
Well, I think that the reason they probably don't mess with guys like yourself is because they expect most of the public to just take it as a wild story and not believe any of it. Because let's face it, most people don't do the research. Most people don't look at the evidence. It's all about what they believe. They woke up, they had a dream last night, and now they got all the answers. Yeah.
Well, we had we went out there thinking that we probably would do nothing there. And when I was wrapping everything up, I looked down and there was that artifact thing there under sagebrush. That possible ET artifact down there at the bottom of the web page.
Yeah.
The home page. And I was hooked. This isn't from here. I've been a Western historian. I've read published 3 books. And I knew what you'd find out, in the sticks. And that was like nothing that I've ever seen. And I took it to a restaurant that night, and there was two guys who were cattle inspectors that came in, and we kind of said hello and nodded at each other, and then I thought, well, let's start this investigation right here. So I took the thing over on a napkin, and I said, what do you guys think of this? And this is that thing at the bottom of the website, the possible ET organ, artifact body part. And they looked it over and said, where'd you get this? And I said, well, down the road a piece, a little town down here, but about a mile back in the sagebrush. And they looked it over and said, that ain't nothing I ever seen. Another guy said, that ain't no part of no cow either. and that's the name of one of the chapters of the book. So we have a little humor in there, too. So chapter 6 was that ain't no part of no cow. And your readers, if they're on their computers, can look at that. I believe that would be chapter 7.
Now, what's with the honeycomb? I notice a lot of honeycomb. What are they? I don't know. It's almost like they copied the bees' nature.
Well, did I send you a book, Michael?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, some people have sent out books, so I didn't. The honeycomb was between 2 layers of the floor, of the exterior floor. And we think it made or stored energy somehow. It was 1.5 inches, and you can see it there on the a couple of shots there of it on the website.
Yeah.
And we found one. Ours is at the top, and that's the honeycomb. It was about 7 inches long, and those little brown dots apparently lined up in the channels. Well, then we found an identical one that came down at an island in Japan, and it's down there below there, called 1971 identical honeycomb from Japan. So we think that there's some kind of a power system going on between an inner and outer hull and may have to do with the with anti-gravity. We're just not sure. But something went on in those channels, and we found those little brown dots that were on the top of the of one layer of metal and on the bottom of another, and they go together like a sandwich. And we think that as soon as power was shot in that direction, that those things activated and may have made that part of the craft immune from gravity. We have no way of knowing. But they had it wasn't a decoration, and we started using honeycombs ourselves in some of our missiles a few years after this crash. I think we had a Matador missile that had honeycomb wings on it.
Interesting.
It's very light stuff. It's very strong and very light.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because now again, another point brought up is that every time this stuff is found or discovered with the extraterrestrial type technology, all of a sudden, it's all a myth, but then later you see that we have it. We're using it in certain ways.
Well, we don't know. We're not in science, so
right.
Colonel Corso said he'd taken a lot of stuff to the industry that they had. He had a file cabinet full of stuff that came from the Roswell crash, and he took it out to some of the people in industry. And there was some question of whether he really done that or not, but I have no reason to doubt it. Because the Army isn't selling it to people. They've taken it out. I think some went to Bell Labs. Some went to Howard Hughes, who had aircraft operations at that time. They were giving it to people who might be able to develop it. And so there's probably some of that technology out there.
Oh, I'm betting there is. Art, we've got to take one last break, and then I want to... Sure.
Yeah, I'm at ARTC, like art class, ARTC, at Conpoint with two N's, .net. So it's ARTC at Conpoint, CONNPOINT.net. And I answer all my emails, and anybody has any questions, I can send photos and stuff like that back. If there's no charge or anything, I just love to talk to people about it if they're interested.
All right, great. And anything else that you'd like to get out there, Art, by all means, go ahead. And I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And Art Bell's coming back. I think in July he'll be back. So maybe you could hook back up with him again. Well,
I'd sure like to. I've tried to get a hold of him, but I have a feeling I'm going to have to go out there to Frump and tack on his fence. I'm 700 miles from there right now, but I'd sure like to get a hold of him, but he's pretty much incognito for the average person now. So I know some people who know him. Well, I'll just kind of go generally over what we have talked about. And one of the things that we find that is very interesting, particularly the women are interested in that shoe sole. And we find that thing was 4 7/8 inches long, but only an inch wide at the instep. And our kids, when their feet are 4 7/8 inches long, are about 2 or 3 inches wide across the toes. So in my book, I have a diagram of how our little shoe sole fits an Earth-sized foot, and there's plenty left over on both sides, so it wouldn't go in this shoe. And we use the Bannock shoe ordering chart that everybody knows. Shoe stores do it. And we found some stuff called wax material that was laying around, little pieces of wax. And all of them had a curved side to it. We don't understand what that was. And later on, we were reading somebody's description of the interior of a UFO, and they said it was kind of like it was painted or with wax. And the idea, we think, probably behind that was to insulate any bodies inside there from any power surges or anything that might be going through the metal. And so apparently the inside of the crew compartment had a wax coating on it. And we found some of that wax laying around there. And some of the things that I was listening on the radio in 1997, and Art Bell Art Bell was down at Roswell interviewing Colonel Corso. And the first time I had heard, I've been on this since '94, and this was 3 years later. The first time I'd heard Plain of San Augustine mentioned was when he was in that interview with Linda Moulton Howe, and he said somebody asked him about the craft. He said, well, it was from some of it was from Roswell, but sometimes I get the idea that some of the material came from the planes crash out there.
Yeah.
And so he mentioned it too. Some of the high-ups mentioned it, and then somebody said, "Well, was that some kind of a thing that happened up by Trinity?" I said, "No, it happened down there outside of Socorro on the plains of San Augustine." So that was the first time that anybody had mentioned the crash that was highly placed, and we have quite a bit of material, and the book is about a half-inch thick, a little over, 90 pages. 90 photographs on 135 pages, and you can go on the website and order it if you want. It's at UFOcrashbook.com, and they will want to press how to order, and press it, and they'll show him how to get to the order page. And I understand they're selling pretty well, so and I don't think you had to wait more than a week or 10 days.
Well, good. And we're going to keep you linked up, too, because we have an archive page, and it's open to everybody. We don't have it locked, so people can go in, and in there will be a description of tonight's show with your links, and people will always be able to bounce, which we've had you linked up since the first time you've come on, so you'll be linked up again.
Well, it's the kind of thing we kind of have to stay with.
Yeah.
This is something I've stayed with for 30 years now, and well over 30 years, and it kind of gets in your blood after a while.
Yeah,
we had a lot of fun with the history, and went back and checked people's records in World War I and things like that, and just a heck of a lot of fun to do. A lot of work, but a lot of fun, too.
Yeah, and now we did get a question from one of our chat rooms here, and says, can you ask the guests about Horse Springs and chicken? Horse Springs kids and chicken.
Okay, now what would he want to know about Horse Springs?
I have absolutely no idea. He just says ask him about it. Something about chicken. I don't know.
Chickens? Chickens at Horse Springs?
Yeah.
So I've been to Horse Springs. They've got chickens, but Horse Springs isn't very far from our site.
Okay.
And so it's not very far at all. Our rancher, rather we not mention exactly where it is, but it's not far, and it's about 30 miles south of the Daddle on Highway 12 in New Mexico. So your guest has got some good information there.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Well, Art, I thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope we could do this again soon. And I hope you'll keep me updated if anything new comes along. I'd love to talk to you about that as well.
Well, it's my pleasure.
All right. Well, have a great night, my friend. And again, keep up the good work. And I'll ask Keith about Art getting in touch with you when he starts back up.
I'm sure I'd sure like him to know about it. I'll send him a book, but he's the one that kind of turned me on in the 90s before he gave his show up, and I'd like to thank him and be in contact with him. So I really like to, if you get make my year to get a hold of Art Bell.
All right, great. Well, this will be running on his network, so he'll definitely get the message, I think. So, but thank you.
That's good. That's good.
All right. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it, and again, stay safe, and looking forward to talking again.
Take care.
All right, you too. Bye-bye. All right, everybody, there you have it. Art Campbell here for the
right now. I put it out and paste it up. But on the homepage that we have, it shows a gentleman working with a metal detector, and we found quite a bit of stuff underground, and some of it was even on the surface.
Amazing. And and I was looking at the pictures, and of course we talked about some of this the last time, and I think that it's incredible stuff. Now, who exactly discovered, because I don't remember everything about it, but who discovered the crashed object?
The crashed object was found, we're pretty sure, by a soil conservation agent named Barney Barnett. It was actually, he was working with his first year with the Soil Conservation Service and was on his way south down the highway and saw something glinting. And he knew the ranchers and what they were building. He didn't know of any barns over there. So they thought, well, probably it's an airplane down. I got to get over there. So he found a way over there. And when he got there, he said it was a round disc. It was split open, and there were several, one or two aliens on the ground. He told a friend it wasn't from here. And so he's the guy that pretty well discovered it.
So he actually described seeing alien bodies.
Yeah, we think there were 4, and we recently had some new information that came to us by way of the internet and some other detective work, and apparently there were 2 alive, and they tried to get them to Los Alamos, where they had a place where they could keep them, and one died on the way, and the one lived for about 3 years. And apparently, the guy that was in charge of the cleanup was in contact with the alien, and he went up to visit him at Los Alamos several times.
I see. So now there was an archaeological team as well. Who?
Yes, yeah. That was a complication. This would be a big complication for them because the guy is getting ready to do his PhD, and the morning he's ready to start, they see the night before something come down. They thought it was a big meteor. Well, meteorites cost you could get a pound one. Sold $50,000, so they were pretty. They were thinking maybe they'd find a meteorite on government land or something, And they saw this lighted thing come down, so they went over in the morning before they started their archaeological dig and saw this craft laying there. And then Mr. Barnett had driven up by earlier, and they walked. They had to go through a fence. It's called a drift fence. That's where some of your folks know what a drift fence is. It's essentially not a pasture, but it's a fence to keep cattle from drifting from one place to another, and to kind of keep them in a bunch, essentially. And they couldn't find a gate, so they crawled under the fence, crawled down this gully, and there was Mr. Barnett standing there scratching his head with looking at the UFO, two bodies. So they had to, make a pretty tough choice. This guy wasn't going to get his PhD from Harvard the next year, which is where he was enrolled. If he went back there and said he just found a crashed UFO, how about the money for my dig next year? And I don't think it would have worked out at all. So they kept quiet about it, which was what the Army wanted them to do. And they leaned on Barnett to keep quiet about it. But after a while, after he retired about 10 years later, in 59, I believe, 58, 59, he began to talk a little more about it. So he only told relatives out of town, so there wouldn't be any. And he and his wife never mentioned it on the phone.
So when this craft was found, how did the military get involved? I mean, when did they find out about it? I think if I had found it, they would have been the last people I called.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't call anybody from there. They didn't have a telephone down until 1989.
Oh. We're
talking remote here. And we think probably a spotter plane came up to look for it out of the White Sands, Alamogordo area. They may have seen something on radar and were able to check the last place that they could see it. And they were there within 45 minutes of Mr. Barnett and the archaeologist. And so they had apparently information that something had crashed there. And we think they left a crew there for a week or so cleaning up. There's lots of little pieces of foil and stuff. And we had everything analyzed, really detailed analysis of everything we found.
Yeah, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the analysts and you know what was discovered. I'd love to get into all that.
Well, essentially, the thing that was the most laying around, and we found some of it, was pieces of foil that looked like foil from a barbecue or something. And we didn't think much about it. We picked up everything that was there, and later we had it analyzed and found inches long, 13 and a quarter, and 2 inches wide on the flanges. And we actually think it was an H-beam. H-beams hold horizontal loads, and I-beams they use them for skyscrapers, to hold a vertical load. And we think the H-beam underneath the floor of a UFO would be pretty appropriate because it would certainly be a horizontal load. Right.
So now, I would have to ask, how does the military miss stuff like this? Because you would think that they would get a fine-tooth comb and make sure nobody had
we saw those pictures on Unsolved Mysteries where the military guys crawling side by side, picking up, grasshopper legs or what have you, And we get the feeling that this is the way it was. Well, this stuff was scattered over a quarter of a mile, probably 100 yards wide. The foil was. The heavy wreckage was pretty well in the trajectory of the craft that was crashing, but the foil had been blown around over the years and covered over with sand and dirt. We're in the Royal here, which is a sandy, dry gulch, essentially what it is, and it occasionally handles flash floods. So that's how the drainage works in western New Mexico. You go to the nearest Royal, and the water runs away. So that's kind of where we were. It was about a mile from the road, and we were able to drive right down to it. But we thought that also. But here's the problem: we have rattlesnakes there, not a lot of them, but enough of them where you don't want to take your hand in a hole.
Yeah.
We have buckbrush, which is kind of prickly. And it's not like an open prairie where you got all these Army guys crawling on their hands and knees, looking like a prayer vigil in Iraq.
True, and back then they probably didn't have the technology that we have today where they could scan through the soil and stuff, right?
Well, they had metal detectors, but they weren't. World War II, the metal detector was made to pick up the pin of a mine, maybe a quarter of an inch across. And it would have been quite a lot of work to get a lot of metal detectors up there. So what they did, essentially, was pick up what they could and cover up what they didn't want to take with them. Well, they didn't know there was 14.5 inches of rainfall there every year. And within 5 years, a lot of the stuff was on the surface again.
Mm-hmm.
And no one goes down there. So we found it, 1994.
And so now,
okay, well, I go way back. I'm in my early 80s now, and I started the UFO thing when in the late 50s when we were going to school in Kansas City. I was a student, and we started a UFO club there, and then I branched out into NICAP, which was National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and I worked with Major Donald Keyhole there on a couple of investigations. And so I kind of hung it up for about 25 or 30 years, because I was in public school teaching in small towns, and there weren't a lot of people interested in small town UFOs. They were interested in crops and everything else, but not small town, not UFOs. So I started about 20 years ago at this site, and said, well, I'll go down and take a look. And I went back a dozen times, and I've been going there since 1994. We found so much stuff that I couldn't leave it. So we wrote a book on it.
I see. And if you wouldn't mind, maybe please share some of the details about this UFO crash on the plains of San Augustine back in 1947, because I think a lot of people know about Roswell. You don't hear too many people talk too much about the other crash.
Well, this happened 5 days before the Roswell crash was discovered. Now, it's possible they went down the same night, but ours was near a highway and theirs wasn't. Mm-hmm. So that may be the difference. But as far as we know, unless two ships collided in the air, our side has nothing to do with Roswell. But we have found Roswell doesn't have one scrap of evidence that lots of people have talked about it, but we found it out there, but had to take a bushel basket to get most of it out each time. So we had 15, 20 pounds of wreckage we pulled out of the site. I'm up on if your listeners are on their computers, can I give a website out?
Oh, yes, please do.
Okay, website is UFO, UFOcrashbook.com. Take a look at 3 W's at UFOcrashbook.com, and they should be up on it.
And as a matter of fact, Art, I have you linked up on our website, and it goes right over. We got a tonight's pick page, so your link is there, and we also have it on the home page in the picture slider.
Oh, great! All right, now I'm not at my computer. I can get to it. It was about 10 feet away, but I'm looking at my home page. It was a coated foil. It had some of the foil had 12 or 15 different pieces of elements on it, on one side, and on a coating, and on a base aluminum. And we didn't have anything like that in 1947. Our aluminum foil is pretty much 99% aluminum, and you look on the box and you'll see a Reynolds wrap or Alcoa or anywhere we got up there, and you'll see that it's almost 99% aluminum. And this had 8 or 10 additives, and then there was a whole bunch of trace elements that were under 100 pounds per, they call it 100 parts per million. And so we only counted the ones that were higher as being added probably by the aliens for some reason. But I had no idea what it was for. It was little pieces like you'd find... after somebody bought a hot dog or something like that, they're trying to wad it up. And these were flat and quite crinkled. And we have some of that on the web page. If anybody's on that www.ufocrashbook.com, the first thing at the top is some of the foil. We have one of our Navajo workers with a metal detector there, and that was the foil we found. And we found about 15 pieces of this. And by the way, they didn't sell foil in the area until 1955. It was very slow getting in there because the ranch people had ways of cooking and they weren't freezing yet. There's no power, not a lot of power to freeze. So they'd cook up everything, and I asked one gal what she did with the leftovers. She said, well, they went to the dogs. So they had everything, all the bases pretty well covered. But this foil, was just too much of it to be a coincidence, and they weren't using it until 10 years later. They used it for freezer wrap, actually, then.
No.
Keep freezer burned down.
You
can see it there on the web page.
Yeah. Oh, I'm looking at the pictures now, and some some great photos. Now,
we had. I'm a photography teacher, and I won't let anything out that's not good and sharp. Right. And some of the other stuff we found also was coated with various coatings of elements. And now we did find an I-beam, which is kind of our holy grail, essentially, because Roswell was pretty well talked about I-beams there. But ours is a big fat thing, 13